This is Breaking the 180, the podcast that continues to dive into the whole world of film, TV, and pop culture evolution as it continues in this very unique year in more ways than one. 2024 is rolling into the summer, and it's not quite what the industry expected, but we are getting some gems. I'm Alcy Renhefo.
And I'm Sebastian Carrasco, and let's just roll right into the post-apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines.
Furiosa! The darkest of angels.
And that is, of course, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, the first prequel in George Miller's classic Mad Max series of films, which first began as a trilogy in the late 70s and into the 80s, starring Mel Gibson. It's basically the franchise that made Mel's career. Took a bit of a break and then came roaring back into pop culture prominence in 2015 with Fury Road, which is by general agreement, one of the great action films of all time. So now the pressure on Mr. Miller is, does Furiosa deliver? And we can definitely agree that it does.
It delivers and then some, but not in the ways we might expect coming from Fury Road. Now, despite what it might feel like, Fury Road came out almost a decade ago.
Yeah.
So everyone was wondering, what exactly will Furiosa be? And why would we want to watch a movie about Furiosa?
Yeah.
And the first thing I'll say is that this movie seems to be the culmination of everything Miller has done with Mad Max since 1979. It has the high-octane spirit of Fury Road mixed with the elements from the Gibson trilogy.
Yeah.
You can see every Mad Max movie in this one.
It's a very good point of departure to talk about this film, because it's true. Viewers who came into this world strictly through Fury Road in 2015, which at the time, I guess it was kind of a continuation, but it is also a hybrid reboot since Mel wasn't in the lead role anymore. The role was taken over by Tom Hardy, who's obviously younger than Mel Gibson. But this movie, Furiosa, combines that less frenetic, though no less entertaining aspect of the original Mad Max movies with that eye-popping, visually stunning, visceral action from Fury Road. So while Fury Road really was driven by the action, right, it was this very straightforward plot about Max as this wanderer in what's called the wasteland, which is really Australia, a couple of years after nuclear war, helping Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron in Fury Road, to basically escape with the quote-unquote brides of this warlord, Immortan Joe. Furiosa is more, it's an origin story. It's a Genesis tale. It's an ancient epic in a post-apocalyptic style.
And it's not just an origin for Furiosa, but it's also an origin of the wasteland in the Fury Road reboot departure.
Yeah.
Because we learn a lot about Immortan Joe, about Gastown, about the Bullet Farm. And I didn't know exactly what to expect coming in. I knew from very early reviews that people were very happy with it, but you can definitely tell this feels closer to Road Warrior in terms of structure, and even a bit of Thunderdome,
Yeah.
I would say, in terms of the next civilization that grows from the ashes. And at first, it was kind of hard to get into the pacing because I actually had no idea how the movie was going to be structured.
Right.
But then when I kind of got into it and I realized, okay, this isn't wall-to-wall action, and this is Miller really telling a mythology.
Well, the pacing, it's true. It might throw some viewers off because, again, if your sole point of reference, let's say, is Fury Road, which is a masterful film.
And I can't blame them,
Yeah.
considering visually how similar it is.
Yes. No, absolutely. The palette is the same. The visual scheme is the same. Fury Road was more of a chase movie. I mean, that's a straight-on chase film where...
Wall to wall.
Yeah.
From the beginning to the 2-hour mark, it just doesn't stop.
This one is, it's a very grand story, both of Furiosa, but yeah, this world that she's inhabiting, and we get more of a sense of how Immortan Joe's regime operates, what the wandering biker gang culture is, personified by Mr. Chris Hemsworth's Dementis, who's the first warlord that Furiosa meets in this story, and how politics is at play, right? People are fighting over resources and control of resources, and these warring gangs fight over the control of oil fields and munitions factories, which you didn't get that in Fury Road. Although, I mean, Fury Road beautifully laid out the conflict, right? She's trying to escape with these women, and then Immortan Joe controls the water basically from his citadel.
Well, it's all there, but it's incredibly blink and you'll miss it.
Yeah.
He'll have a long tracking shot where you see the citadel and nothing is ever explained.
Yeah.
And that's why I loved it.
Yeah.
You see the Moo Moo Milkers,
Yeah.
and you're like, got it. And this one goes more into this tenuous balance in a way that isn't overwritten.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that I was not expecting is this is maybe next to Thunderdome as the most talkative
Yes.
Mad Max movie. And some great writing, too, and we'll get to it in a bit, but at the very end, the confrontation between Dementis and Furiosa, I was really surprised at how fantastic the writing was.
One, it had genuine pathos, and but Miller, his great merit as a film director, I think, is that he never repeats himself, and it's something I kept telling myself when walking into Furiosa, because I really like Fury Road, and you kind of want a second scoop, right, of that really.
He never repeats, but he's always improving on ideas from the earlier films.
Yes, and he's very versatile. Listeners who are, let's say, don't follow his career closely will still be surprised to know what he's directed. Along with the Mad Max films, he's directed movies you would never associate with the director of Mad Max, like Lorenzo's Oil, Babe, Pig in the City.
If I had words, I'd sing a day for you.
La 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 la
La la la la.
Happy Feet. He produced the first Babe. Happy Feet 2. He followed up Fury Road with a really beautiful meditation on storytelling, 3,000 Years of Longing. So he's always trying something new. He doesn't just repeat something for the sake of it. And what's great about Furiosa is that he could have easily just made another Fury Road copycat movie. And instead he's like, no, I really am going to seriously tell the story of this character that became so popular in my last Mad Max trip, but using that to incorporate wider themes and continue this big world building that we see in the movie.
Well, as the story goes, the backstory for Furiosa was being developed during the production of Fury Road.
Yeah.
So he'd been carrying this story for years now, which I think is really cool. And I'm sure over these years, he has borrowed elements from different sources. He's expanded on some ideas, and that's how we end up with this movie. Now, the first thing I'll note is that this movie is actually broken up into chapters.
Yeah.
Which is the first time he's done that for a Mad Max movie. Yeah. Viewers might be shocked to learn that this is his longest Mad Max movie by a country mile.
Oh, yeah. Most Mad Max films, as famous as they are, really only clock in at, close to the 2-hour mark, 148, 150 or something.
Fury Road was the longest when it came out at 2 hours. Then Thunderdome was 1 hour 45, and then both the first Mad Max and Road Warrior are both 90 minutes.
Yeah, and of course, and they fly by. I mean, they're very well done 90 minutes. He doesn't waste space. I mean, that's what's good. That's what's another good feature about Miller, because even though Furiosa is 2.5 hours, it never wastes a scene. Though there's something important happening in every scene, in every moment. So it's not that he's just making this bloated movie for the sake of making it big. It's just that the story itself fits well in a 2.5 hour saga, because he's telling Furiosa's story. He's profiling Dementis. He's giving us a little more of Immortan Joe's world, and also making a lot of really eloquent points about everything from cruelty to the nature of warfare to what family actually means, to just the little bits of how these people are living in this desert wasteland where there's no water, and you have some people live in these disgusting underground caves, and all these little details that you don't get in Fury Road.
And I will say, this movie is paced well, but out of all his Mad Max outings, this definitely felt heftier.
Yes.
When it was done, I thought, wow, I definitely just ate a 3-course feast.
Yeah.
And to balance that with the other films, and to kind of expand on what I mean by that, even Thunderdome, which is considered the weakest, they really do fly by. I mean,
yeah.
When you get to the end of all of the movies, you're like, oh, wow.
Well, Thunderdome always has been divisive since it premiered in 1985. At the time, Miller was pressured a bit to try to make a more family-friendly Mad Max, if you could call it that, because Mad Max 2 and Mad Max 1 had been big hits. Mad Max, for a time, even the 1979 Mad Max, held the record for the most successful indie film, or the most successful film of all time in terms of budget versus gross, because the budget was so small, but what it grossed was so huge.
I mean, it was literally made for pennies.
Exactly. It was Miller slapping it together with resources. They didn't have
permits to shoot on the highways and stuff.
Yeah, it was an indie film, basically. Mad Max 1 is almost a precursor to like El Mariachi and these kinds of indie classics, right? But they were very successful. Mad Max 2 and Mad Max 1 are very good, but they're also very dark. I mean, they're very stark, gritty, post-apocalyptic visions where, there's rape, there's looting, there's violence, extreme violence, along with the really amazing car chases.
I mean, I would say the first one is the darkest.
Yes.
It's my personal favorite. I think I like the characterization the most. I like how it's on the edge of the apocalypse, and you can feel that with all the characters. But yeah, Road Warrior, of course, is very dark too. I mean, there's torture, there's rape.
And it was credited at the time with helping popularize punk dystopia in movies and later in even sci-fi novels. You can see a direct line between Mad Max 2 and movies of the time like Jubilee, where punk dystopia becomes a thing, especially in the Reagan years, where everybody was waiting for nuclear war. I mean, we're waiting for it now, but at the time it was a big fixture of pop culture because of the Cold War. Fury Road, I would actually probably rank. I really like Mad Max 2. I love Mad Max 1. I think you're right on all points on that movie. It's a great film. I really love Fury Road personally. I remember seeing it on its opening night, and the landscape of movies was so stale at the time. It was invigorating to see that kind of action movie.
For the audiences, we rewatched Fury Road, but the black and chrome edition.
Yes.
And the black and chrome blew me away again.
The black and chrome is wonderful. It's a beautiful edition. If you haven't seen it, please go. You can rent it on Amazon for like $4 or something?
$3, yeah.
So go check it out. It really gives it a whole new life. Thunderdome, I was just gonna say I rewatched it recently as well to refresh and before checking out the new one, and it's still well directed. It's just that the script is the weakest of the original three. It tries too hard to.
We'll do the Peter Pan, Hook, Lost Boys thing.
Yeah, and Tina Turner is one of the antagonists, but she's underused. As much praise as she got at the time for her performance, she's very underused. She sings a song, of course, on the soundtrack that doesn't really go with the Mad Max universe, but there are still memorable images and great action scenes. And I mean, I like the ending when they're flying through what's left of New York, Sydney. My bad. Every apocalypse in the movies is in New York, so it's easy to forget these guys are in Australia. But when they're flying through what's left of Sydney, and you see the Sydney Opera House now just like as a dust-covered relic, that was pretty cool. But it just lacked the ferocity of the first two Mad Maxes.
However, a lot of the world building from Thunderdome is actually carried very directly into Fury Road and Furiosa. What do I mean by that? In terms of the visual aesthetic of the post-apocalypse or the rebirth of society, in terms of people strapped together with whatever they can scrounge, the idea of language being reframed based on, a lack of knowledge, lost knowledge.
Yeah, an interesting comparison I would make here between these recent Mad Maxes, funny enough, is to a movie we also recently discussed, The Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. In the sense that this one does a good job, too, of imagining realistically if civilization collapsed and if only, a few humans were left after a nuclear war, we would not talk the same way. Knowledge of the past, we'd be in a new dark ages, basically. And language would get muddled and strewn together the same way that after the collapse of the Roman Empire, all these, languages like Latin and what would become, English and Spanish and French and stuff, they all really just kind of formulate out of this stew of what was left from the Latin world, right? From the classic world of the Greeks and Romans. And the subsequent interchanges with what they then called, barbarian peoples that they interacted with. That's the same thing that would happen now. So I love how Miller in all these movies imagines people talking in ways that today would seem eloquent, but to them it's like slang. Like, can you make it historic? all the witness me, you have been summoned to Valhalla. Things that sound larger than life to us. If that's all these people know in terms of descriptives, yeah, that's how they're gonna talk in a post-apocalyptic world, because they have no record of anything. I love that scene in Fury Road where they're all sitting out there at night watching a little dot go by in the sky, right? And they talk about how, oh, that's a satellite. Back then it used to like beam communications between people. Everyone had a show back then. Like everyone had a show in the old world. That's all they know, and that's how they would talk. I always get annoyed with these futuristic movies like, I don't know, like Battlefield Earth and these really bad ones where people still talk like they're in, contemporary Los Angeles, even though it's a post-apocalyptic world where aliens have destroyed everything.
And since you brought up, or I guess we've also been talking about Fury Road, one thing I'd like to note in particular about Fury Road, the previous Gibson tenure of Mad Max are slightly more nihilistic. Even in Thunderdome, it's like, this is the new madness, right? That's all that's left on Earth. The only people that survive are those that succumb to it. So it's like the rational irrationality. And of course we see that in Fury Road, but it's also very interesting. Miller is coming back as a much older man. When he made Fury Road, which had a notorious development, he was about late 60s into his 70s, but it's actually a very hopeful movie.
Yeah.
That deals with redemption and the seeds of a new future. And watching the Black and Chrome edition, it really hit me how, yes, it's chaotic and it's a masterpiece of action cinema, but in the dialogue itself, which there isn't too much, but when we do get more heavy dialogue, it really is trying to give future generations a sense of we can survive and we can thrive.
It doesn't get bleak. The first Mad Maxes were very bleak. I wonder if, as a younger director, he wanted to stay bleak to issue those movies as a warning or a wake-up call, right?
Look at the news now, right? What we're seeing in the original Mad Max movies. As of recording this episode, we're reading reports that Mexico might run out of water.
Yeah.
There are sandstorms, these huge sandstorms sweeping through, I believe it was Mumbai.
Oh, even here in the U.S., we got these massive monster storms wreaking havoc in the Midwest. It is definitely a world spiraling more into environmental, social, and war. A war chaos. But Miller, I wouldn't be surprised if with age he's just become a bit more hopeful, or maybe he doesn't feel the pressure to be as edgy as when he was a young guy trying to get started in movies, where at the time in 1979, 1980, making those first Mad Maxes, that was bleak, right? The way those movies end, you're supposed to, instead of cheering, you're left kind of haunted, You're cheering during the action scenes, but you walk out a bit haunted. And he was a bit of a haunted guy at the time. Miller got his start. His original path in life was not to be a filmmaker. He came from a very working class Australian family, very, very low income. He decides to study medicine. That's what he decides to pursue as a career. And he actually went to medical school and graduated from the first lap, right, of medical school. But he started getting an interest in cinema, and he started on the side just kind of playing around with filmmaking. And part of the influence on Mad Max on the first movie was that Miller had lost a lot of friends in this drag racing car culture that was becoming popular in Australia at the time. And he remembers friends either getting killed or he, as a medical student, witnessing a lot of car wreck victims being brought into the hospital. So he would get this up-close view of what a car wreck does to a body, right? The way it mangles it.
Do you think David Cronenberg consulted Miller when making Crash?
You never know, right? I mean, you never know. It's kind, these directors, once they're part of that inner circle, it's funny the things we don't know that goes on. A lot of, students I meet who are into Star Wars, are big Star Wars geeks. They're always shocked to learn that the famous crawl at the beginning of Star Wars, where it describes everything that's going on before the action kicks off, was not written by George Lucas. Lucas wrote of an original draft of that crawl that he just couldn't get to work. So one day Brian De Palma came by to hang out with him at the studio at Fox, and he offered to do a rewrite himself. And so Brian De Palma, Mr. Carey and Scarface and Carlito's Way and Mission to Mars, he took it upon himself to rewrite the opening crawl. So the opening crawl was written by Brian De Palma. So, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if these guys who are into, body horror and body, very, I would say gory. They're not, because they're not doing, horror films, but this kind of anatomical filmmaking. I wouldn't be shocked if they do consult each other when they do this sort of thing. And there are shots in Fury Road and in Furiosa. I'm sure Cronenberg fucking loves, considering the stuff he's always doing in his movies.
Also, a friendly reminder, if you haven't seen David Cronenberg's Crash...
Yeah.
Watch it. It's a lot. It's mesmerizing. And come back and write a comment if you've seen it.
It's on the Criterion Collection, actually. So if you don't have to get any of these lame, low-grade DVDs that were around for it at the time. I mean, quick recap. If you don't know what that movie's about, all I'll say is it's about getting turned on by being in a car crash. And it's not hyperbole. What the sentence just described is literally what the movie is. Like you don't get off unless you're unless you're in a wreck. But not to slam it though. I mean, it is a very unique and intelligent movie. It's a very 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 bold work by Cronenberg, who's coming back soon, hopefully. He just had a new film premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. Yeah. Which apparently is also very personal and based on his own experience of the death of his wife. So we'll be talking about that one too once that one comes out. But back to Furiosa, I think Anya Taylor-Joy does something very unique in this movie, which is she has to evoke all the emotional and physical arcs of this character through expressions. Right, it's not a lot of dialogue
for her character.
And she's almost. I mean, honestly, this is the hardest thing she's had to do since The Witch, back in 2016, the movie that really made her name, the Robert Eggers horror film about pilgrims in colonial America facing off with a witch, which is a beautiful film in its own right, a very Goya-esque piece of work. It established Anya Taylor-Joy as a name in the industry, but this one, I think, proves she can do action, but not in a shallow way. She's not J-Lo. She's much better than that.
And I learned something very interesting. So there are two versions of Furiosa in this movie. There's a little girl who gives a very good performance.
Yes, excellent. Yes,
and
the early Furiosa.
Because we saw this with our very good friend Jose, and I was saying I didn't know when it was actually Anya Taylor-Joy on screen because the transition was so seamless. Well, guess what I found out? They used visual effects throughout the beginning of the film to make that kid actor look more like Anya Taylor-Joy throughout each scene.
Oh my God.
So that by the time they actually switched actresses, you wouldn't notice.
It's a Lila Brown is that actress you just mentioned, and well, I don't know how to feel about that. I think it's
great sleight of hand, but also it makes you think for a sec.
I mean it works in the movie. It works visually. you don't ever feel like you're watching what I call Irishman faces. Like the Scorsese movie where everyone clearly looks like they're walking out of a CGI wax museum.
Well, Miller himself just talked about that in a very good Vanity Fair interview that, yeah, they could have DH'd Charlize Theron, but all you see is the digital effect. And to be fair, Anya Taylor-Joy really looks like her in this movie. So
it's a testament to how it, when it works, it's not that bad to simply cast.
Just recast.
I mean, hey, it works in The Godfather Part 2. It still works now. Okay.
But since we're talking about visual effects, what I will say, it did catch me off guard a little bit. There are more noticeable visual effects in this film,
yes.
which kind of took me out a bit, not to ruin the experience, but because of how polished Miller is as a filmmaker, those effects become more noticeable than if it was more shoddily put together.
Oh, you know what? You're right. Now, I'm going out on a limb here to say I noticed a little more green screen in this one.
Yes,
definitely
in particular, which I suppose you could make the argument that it lends more to the storybook mythology feel. But in Fury Road, I know there were a lot of visual effects because it was nominated for a visual effects Oscar, although it lost to Ex Machina. But I couldn't tell.
Well, but
I could never tell. It's one of those flawless movies. Actually, there's one shot towards the end where you can kind of tell when one of Immortan Joe's sons meets his end. But aside from that, it's seamless. And this one, like the tanker chase, there's some shots when people are on top of the truck, and I was just thinking, oh, they are not in the location.
Yeah. That's what I meant. It wasn't those scenes I especially noticed green screen. Whereas in Fury Road, all of it feels organic. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if in Fury Road, a lot of the stunts are there in the desert, and it's usually where I notice more visual effects in Fury Road. It's more when there's either like some kind of overly gargantuan explosion or, that famous climax at the end where everything crashes together. The wheel is flying towards the lens and our favorite guitar player's axe is just like flying towards us.
That's when he finally stops shredding. By the way, surprise cameo from one of the greatest characters
of all time.
He just can't stop shredding. But yeah, I don't know. It was so strange because I know they did a lot of those stunts for real. I mean, you can tell it's intricately staged, but then in wide shots in Fury Road, where maybe they had digital comping, it still looks flawless. In this one, it did take me out in a bit, which, I don't know, I guess it was slightly disappointing. I mean, I don't know how to feel about it. I guess on its own it's disappointing, but it's so well made.
It's the growing dependency on CGI because we have to remember Fury Road's production was so troubled. It was like Apocalypse Now. I mean, it was like one of those legendary, just hard shoots.
Well, Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy, I think, wanted to kill each other.
They hated each other. I think the studio thought of sending somebody down there to physically get in between them, but we have to remember it was so troubled it started shooting in 2012. Production on Fury Road started in 2012. Obviously, CGI was already a thing by 2012. It's been a thing in action films really since 96. That's really the year where it really takes off as a dominant thing in action movies. But it still wasn't in 2012 what it is now, where now you've got, and I don't want to insult George Miller by making this comparison, but now you've got movies like Expendables 4 where, everyone looks like, and if you've heard our podcast, we've brought this up many times, it looks like they're all in a Nintendo 64 landscape.
Well, even Marvel, right?
Yeah.
In DC, it's like, oh, this is just a fancy cartoon. No, you have the complete other end of the spectrum, like the Caesar cycle, so
Yeah.
Rise, Dawn, War, and Kingdom, which we talked about
Yeah.
on our previous episode, or even Avatar, where the effects are so polished and so dominant, your brain knows it's not real, but
Yeah.
then it overrides itself because of how believable it is. My point is, and this goes to the craftsmanship of Furiosa, that when we cut to shots with green screen or other effects, they are more noticeable because the surrounding film is so gorgeous and put together. That's my point.
Yeah.
That my brain registered it more, and it kind of threw me off guard.
Oh no, there were there are wide shots in Fury Road, right? That it just looks like it doesn't really become noticeable until something extreme happens, like the in Fury Road when they drive early into the movie into that giant thunderstorm with the wind and fire twisters. In this one, the wide shots of just someone driving across the desert, it does look more artificial than in Fury Road.
And part of the reason we're bringing this up is they'll have other wide shots of these caravans of cars driving through the desert, which is real. You can tell that this is Australia. They're shooting it, or Namibia. I don't know exactly the details of the production. I believe there's a book coming out about it, so I'm sure we'll learn more details. But it was just very strange because I had just watched Mad Max Fury Road coming into this, right, which set the bar so high. So, yeah, my focus had to kind of be readjusted. But then going back to the surrounding qualities of the film, I mean, it is gorgeously shot. Miller's sense of framing action, always keeping everything in center frame, that no matter how crazy things are, the geography is well established. And it does get crazy because it's not just car chases we get really awesome action scenes.
Oh no, yeah, and Miller has never made his action sequences senselessly. They're always beautifully choreographed. They're always about the physicality of the action. It's not just shootouts, right? He doesn't just resolve everything with a shootout. It's about the grind of the metal and the physical strain of watching one of these actors or characters fly off a rig or try to make it while holding on to the bottom of the truck of the big, or war machine as they call it in these movies. I would compare it in that sense to John Wick, in the sense that it's very wonderfully choreographed action as opposed to just, these kinds of boring shootouts you get
that are
in
just
other
for
movies.
the sake of it, where you're just like, I don't care. Like, you're showing me all these crazy gunfights or special effects, but
it's an art form with Miller and
yes.
and the John Wick movies and
especially now because we're getting more, shootouts and stuff. It's nice he's able to translate the action on top of the vehicles into foot chases and
it's action,
other staging, basically.
And it's action that advances the story. So it's not just thrown in there to kill boredom. It's every big action piece is an essential part of where the story is going, whether it's Furiosa meeting a potential ally or trying to disrupt the schemes of Dementis.
Who we got to talk about Hemsworth in a minute.
Yes. So it's all, there's a point to what's happening. And yeah, Chris Hemsworth, I'll just straight up say this is his best performance ever. It's his best one. I'm sorry, Thor fans, but he's
very good in Rush.
Yes, right. You're right. The Ron Howard movie. But in this one, the thing is, he completely disappears.
And Bad Time at the El Royale. The only other time he's played a bad guy.
Yes, I would say, and I like those. I think he's great in those movies. But in this one, you just stop thinking it's Chris Hemsworth. Like, my mind was never registering. Oh, I'm watching Chris Hemsworth.
He is a delightful bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like Darth Vader, where you kind of love watching him on screen because he has that just like gleeful, demented mind. I mean, he literally rides in a chariot made out of 3 motorcycles.
No, exactly. No, which is glorious because that again, Miller winking at classic epics with that kind of production design, right? It's almost like,
He cites Ben-Hur.
Exactly.
And the fact that I think he saw people do that in real life.
Yes.
Chariot races with motorcycles. But he has a keen mind for cinema. If you watch any interview with him, his callbacks to even The General, Buster Keaton, and of course Ben-Hur.
Oh yeah, no.
Color palette like Kagamusha.
Yeah, he's very. I've always thought there's a affinity between the Mad Max movies and these. It's a great hybrid of these epics, these biblical epics as they used to call them, right? Like Ben-Hur and stuff, and westerns, and also the classic biker movies of the 50s. Mad Max 1. I said it earlier today. Reminds me a lot of The Wild One. With Marlon Brando, and I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Mel Gibson's wardrobe is meant to kind of wink at Brando in The Wild One. So there's all these great influences that he's not copying; he's just absorbing them into an original idea. And again, if we were to survive nuclear war, that is what would happen. People would start forming new forms of government where they would then chariot around with motorcycles.
But what's so fun about Dementis, played by Hemsworth, is he has this following of riders. I mean, it's a huge clan, but he's also a terrible ruler.
Yes,
as we see later in the film.
Well, he's the difference between. It's a great contrast, right? Immortan Joe in Fury Road is the big villain, right? The big monster, but Furiosa is more about the intricacies about these new rulers in this post-apocalyptic world. So you've got Immortan Joe, who, yes, the guy's an asshole. He's this tyrant, but he's more cold and thinking and sober, right?
Well, he has his citadel on lock. I mean, that great scene early on. Remember, we're not spoiling.
Yeah.
But when he tells Hemsworth to pick one of the war boys out.
Oh, yes. It's a great moment where he knows how to flex, right, in public. Dementis is the typical egomaniac who just kind of wants the power for its own sake, but doesn't know what to do with it once he has it. So Hemsworth plays him like your typical megalomaniac who just starts really spiraling downwards the less control he has over what he's taken.
Well, people leave his band, they go rogue.
Yeah.
The Octoboss. We're not going to spoil anything, but let's say Hemsworth likes to mess with his crew.
Yeah.
So then I believe the Octoboss, or at least how I interpreted it, becomes the biker crew that lives in the Rocky Hills.
Yes. And the thing about, here's the beauty of Hemsworth's performance. He makes the character Dementis complex but unlikable. So early on, we see that he genuinely cares for Furiosa when he kidnaps her as a child. But that doesn't necessarily make him a good person. It just means that there's a little spark of goodness inside this megalomaniac fool.
Dementis carries a teddy bear around.
Yes.
And, I guess in order to flesh out what we're talking about, I guess we should rope in the ending confrontation without spoiling it.
Right.
But where Furiosa finally meets Dementis, and it's just an excellent head-to-head. It feels Shakespearean.
Yeah, because he's given lines where he doesn't have like a ha villain monologue. It's more of like
he's goofy and bombastic, but is still self-aware.
Well, he's damaged. I mean, he's clearly a psyche that is self-aware to know, I know I'm garbage, but...
Well, like Max at the end of the first Mad Max movie, where the brain just permanently snaps.
Well, there's a similar subtle hint of of why Dementis went demented, right, in the movie.
Yeah, we won't spoil,
Yeah. But there's a line early in the movie where you get, oh, I see why he probably went crazy. And what, to Miller's credit, yeah, he's kind of making a point about how these villains, these evil types, if you don't want to treat them like cartoons, you should at least give them a bit of a root, right? Like, what pushed the person towards that path?
Well, it's the discussions we have today when it comes to any person who commits heinous crimes or a group of people or
Yeah.
a government. It's like you can understand a group of people or a person went through a traumatic event or sustained abuse, but then if they end up committing those same abuses towards
Yeah.
other people, you still have to condemn that while understanding how they got there.
Exactly. And in the case of these warlords like Immortan Joe, Dementis, yeah, it's kind of like historical figures where we just see the face on the poster or we read the famous anecdotes. But if you dig deeper, you realize there's many more personal reasons why these people chose that path or joined that group or started that movement or carried out that act. And that final monologue with Dementis and Furiosa, I mean, that's why, again, I won't spoil, but even the narrator, because there is a sprinkle of narration throughout the movie, the narrator kind of makes the point of how it's not necessarily going to end the way you think it should end or the way most people think a confrontation like that should end, because Furiosa in that moment kind of starts realizing that the dividing line between her and him is not that wide, because this world is so cruel and violent and ferocious and dog eat dog. She's going to become the same.
Well, look
way
at
as
the
him,
beginning.
Yeah.
And remember Furiosa's line in Fury Road when she meets the Volvolini,
Yeah.
I believe is their name, and she says, "My mother died on the third day," which could mean, oh yeah, the apocalypse. But then we actually see and
In
we
this movie,
connect what happens to her mother with her statements from Fury Road, and you realize how tragic that is. And that's what I'd like to bring up about this being a prequel.
Yeah.
This does what a lot of prequels fail to do. And I've seen some criticisms against it, but I really like how Miller handles it. The way that he expands on images or lines from Fury Road in a way that makes sense in the storytelling itself.
Yes. I would compare it in a funny way to the Star Wars prequels. And what I mean is...
Tread carefully.
what I mean is, despite all the criticisms those movies get and how much they're slammed for their shortcomings, they still convincingly draw threads between what the narratives they're telling with more advanced tech and what we see later in the classic Star Wars movies. You do get a sense of why Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader. You do see how Obi-Wan ends up exiled in Tatooine, or how the twins end up separated and that sort of thing. You know?
I will say the Clone Wars animated show does all of that 100 times better, but that's a conversation for another day. But I think the point you're getting at is, if you're going to tell a prequel,
Yeah.
which is really hard to do because, well, if we know what the end result is going to be, if
What's
we
gonna
know where the
happen, yeah.
characters end up, how do you sell the story to people?
Especially these days. And, there's a lot of chatter going on right now online because of this movie not being the big blockbuster smash they were hoping for on the
After
first
opening
week.
weekend.
Right, exactly. Which is, it's the LA Times had a very good article yesterday on that kind of absurd pressure culture we have now for movies on their opening week. But I think a factor, too, is that we've been so flooded by prequels, sequels, remakes. The next few weeks is going to be all sequels. You've got Bad Boys, Quiet Place, Inside Out, all getting sequels and prequels, and
Later on, Deadpool 3.
Deadpool 3. I mean, it's just an endless parade of
Everything
franchises.
is getting unnecessary spin-offs too.
Yes.
Explaining things that we just didn't need. And I think a lot of people presume that's what Furiosa is.
Yeah.
And in one sense, yes. But, and which is what surprised me, yeah, we know that Furiosa loses her arm. We expect that to happen. But the way Miller reaches those points is more interesting than those points on the timeline existing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's genuinely telling a story. I mean, some other critics have rightfully made funny comparisons to the Bible, to Odysseus, to the Homeric epics, in the sense that Miller is following that line of narrative, that line of storytelling, which is why the narration works so well, too, in this movie. There's a wonderful monologue in the narration. And again, this spoils nothing, but it makes an allusion to all the past wars that have marked the history of the world, and how this battle going on in the wasteland is a part of that legacy of that history.
And I don't know if you caught on, but his montage is exactly the same montage style that we saw in the original movies.
Yes.
Which I thought, I was like, despite all this amazing new technology, he still assembles or calls back to the filmmaking of the past, his own filmmaking.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I love to see that, too.
Yeah, you're right. I was reminded a lot of the ending of Mad Max 2, right? That whole montage that ends with Gibson standing at the top of the highway, and we never saw the road warrior again, and that sort of classic epic storytelling, which allows for the story to keep going on, because you also get the sense Miller is treating the story the way oral histories are treated, right? Where it's passed on, and one detail may change in the next telling.
Oh, what is canon and what isn't. And he had a great interview about that, where he kind of says, well, it all is. If you think about each entry of the Mad Max saga as a tale told by somebody different each time.
Yes. I mean, it's like Gilgamesh, or the fact that the Bible has those famous apocryphal books, right? That some denominations consider canon, some don't. I mean, and that's the same with these epic stories. I mean,
even the ending of the film, which you hinted at earlier, I will not spoil, I promise. I loved that. After the confrontation, the way that the film ends by commenting on the idea of storytelling itself, much like you just mentioned with the Homeric epics and sagas of those type, going back to Lucretius and the Viking sagas.
I mean, we're still debating whether Homer was one guy. I'm not going to get into the conspiracy, the Shakespeare
wasn't real, bro.
but we do know that a lot of the early epics, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, started off as oral histories that were told by storytellers going from place to place in the ancient world. And that's how these movies can work too, especially when we're 40 plus years removed from the first movie. At this point, a lot of the audience going to see Furiosa wasn't even born when Mad Max 1 came out. So it makes sense for Miller to take that classical storytelling approach to continue the saga.
And I think one last note I'd like to end on, well, at least for me, I don't know for you, but I really liked how even the technology and the way the cars look in Furiosa still hint at a connection to the past civilization.
Yes.
Compared to Fury Road. And Fury Road, with a few exceptions, everything is a recycle of a recycle. it's all rusted. Everything has these like spikes on it. But I really like that in Furiosa, we still get the frames of a classic car the way it used to be, and how the inside of the car still has its original upholstery and an actual dashboard. That you can tell that, yes, it's still the post-apocalypse, but we still have these tenuous threads to the world before, and then by the time we get to Fury Road, it's like all of that is gone, or most of it is gone.
Oh yeah, no. Well, I love Furiosa's car, and in the third act when she goes to for her final confrontation, and yeah, it's true. It's this idea that scraps are left, but there's enough left to still build things, and I like something.
They're still shiny. I mean, look at the war rig in Furiosa. It's beautiful in chrome, and then by the time we get to Fury Road, the war rig that they build is shells of former.
Oh well, and there's a deeper meaning behind all that too, in a nice way. In the book Blood and Chrome about the making of Fury Road, Miller says that he's always emphasized when talking to the production designer that he wants to get across that even though civilization has been wiped out, humans still have the capacity to make beautiful things, right? Even if it's out of scraps and junk and whatever the hell's left.
For warlords and tyrants. That's actually a really beautiful thought, that the human spirit of creation still endures. Again, even if it's for war.
Oh, well, I love that scene in Furiosa. Again, it's not a spoiler at all, but I love that scene in Gastown where the guy in charge of Gastown is painting a copy of a classic painting on the wall.
I think I actually laughed out loud.
And it's a great moment, but it's wonderful, right? Because you imagine that people in that world won't attribute to that artwork what we attribute it today, right? Where we can have a whole, discussion on an intellectual and critical level on Van Gogh or Michelangelo, but in a post-apocalyptic world, they would just react to it out of pure immediacy, right? Like, oh wow, that's beautiful, that's wow, that's amazing.
Or the people that retain the knowledge from the old times are these homeless Gandalf characters who have, I believe they have the tattoo of the knowledge all over their skin and stuff.
No, it's wonderful. I mean, I would just end by saying that what I liked a lot about this movie, the more I think about it, is also that Miller, and maybe it's because of the times we're living in right now, but I thought Miller also made very powerful points in this movie about the human condition in terms of how we always have this tragic capacity to practice cruelty and war on each other for whatever, right? Because of resources, because of land, because of personal vendettas, because my tribe needs to wipe yours out. Especially in the third act of the movie, he really brings that idea across very powerfully, how instead of trying to figure out how to survive as a species, the moment these people or in the future acquire water or acquire the citadel, right, they start using it to lord over everyone else and wage war on each other for these things. So it poses a very important question for any audience walking in today to watch it, which is, I mean, is this really the future you want? And are we just going to keep careening towards this? Or are you just going to take it as a popcorn distraction, even though there's people right now in Gaza in particular living through conditions not that far from what you see in this movie, if not more horrifying, to be frank.
Even in your awesome Homeric action flicks, in the right hands, there's still an injection of our current realities and reflections and warnings for what we may become, what we already are. Will we choose that path in the future? Is there a way to still stop the oncoming apocalypse, or are we doomed to that future.
Yeah, like Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It's the best sci-fi. It just knows how to do that, and I really hope when people walk out of this movie, hopefully they'll turn on the news and all of a sudden realize that the aesthetic Miller used in the movie, it's not that far off. So Furiosa, everybody, go check it out. Go see it, please.
We definitely
support.
recommend it.
It's not another cash grab.
No,
prequel,
not at
sequel.
all. We'll have to see how the rest of the summer fares, but
yeah.
we'll give a hint that hopefully soon we'll do our summer preview in the world of anime.
Oh, yes. We've actually come across quite a few gems recently that we're going to be talking about.
But until then,
remember that this is brought to you by Purist Mushrooms, a dietary supplement that you can have with your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or at the gym, the swimming pool, strip club, wherever you want to take that. And
or Morton Joe Citadel.
Or Morton Joe Citadel. If you want a 10% discount on any individual packages that you purchase of Purist Mushrooms, just go to puristmushrooms.com and use our code BREAKING180.
But until then, guys, keep thinking critically and keep watching movies.
Free Palestine.